We are next going to take notes on Unit 1, Lesson 11. So please make sure that you have whatever form of note-taking device you would like to have out and title it Unit 1, Lesson 11 or 1.11. Here we go. The next type of cellular process we're going to be discussing is passive versus active transport. So when you think of things being transported, that's usually materials or things moving either to another location or coming into a location. So when we're discussing this, I want you to be kind of thinking at the cellular level. Now you can notice over here in my diagram that I have the very important cell part. This right here is I'm going to try and write it, cell, drum roll, membrane. So this is the cell membrane that we're going to be focusing on when we're talking about the transport of materials in or out of the cell. So when we're referring to this, we're talking about things that are either going to pass through the cell membrane or are going to come into the cell through the cell membrane. So let's talk about the difference between passive and active. So when we talk about this type of transport, like we said, it can be a variety of things that passes through that cell membrane. It's either nutrients, it can be waste, it could be gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen that must be able to pass through the cell membrane to be able to sustain life. If these things can't interchange and enter into the cell will not exist. When you think of the first type that we're going to discuss, that's passive transport. When I look at this word, I see the word pass. So when I pass through something, I'm easily able to just come in or out of something. It's kind of thinking about it almost like an open doorway that all you have to do is just walk through it. There's nothing required for you to get in or out of that room. And this is pretty much what we refers to as passive transport for cells. So passive transport does not require ATP, remember adenosine triphosphate, that energy that cells use for materials to pass through the membrane. So things can just pass in and out. There's no energy required, hence passive. The materials, which direction they're going to determine that they flow, is things are going to flow from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. If you look at my diagram over here, just kind of using this first example here, we have whatever molecule these black dots might be representing. So you've got these black dots here, and you've got these black dots here. Now I look at this and I think, okay, well, where are the more black dots? So the more black dots are outside of the cell. So this is where our area of high concentration of the black dots are. Now, things like to move from high to low. So that's why it has this arrow here going downwards, because there is less black dots inside the cell. So this is our low concentration of black dots. So in passive transport, if this material is something that the cell will use, they will passively just go straight through this layer because there is more out here than there is inside the cell. Some examples that we haven't quite defined yet are osmosis and diffusion. We'll get into those more specifically after we finish our gummy bear lab, but I do just want you to have some examples of what an example of passive transport is. So now let's compare this to active transport. So you probably once again can envision that since passive transport requires no energy and you can just pass through the cell membrane either in or out, depending upon where the area of concentration gradient is. The active transport, then, if you're doing something active, you're going to need energy, right? So ATP is required for active transport from materials to pass through the cell membrane. And this could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe there's a molecule that's too large to just passively go through the cell membrane. And so there needs to be energy to bring it into the cell. Or maybe things need to go against the concentration gradient. Maybe there's glucose outside of the cell that needs to be brought into the cell, but there's not a difference of that high to low concentration. You can see that over here, where I have a low concentration of my green block molecules compared to the high concentration here. So where is there more green blocks? The high concentration is here inside the cell, and there's less green blocks out here, so there's a low concentration. But if the cell requires these molecules, the cell will use energy through this protein receptor and draw these molecules in. So that would require energy, which makes it active transport. So these will have, where you have materials like I mentioned, will flow against the concentration gradient sometimes. Other times it may just be that the molecule is too large to pass through. And finally, some examples of this, which we will get into more greater detail as we finish up this last lesson, is endocytosis and exocytosis. So I know diffusion and osmosis and exocytosis and endocytosis aren't specific topics or terms that we've discussed as of yet, but I do want you to be able to understand that diffusion and osmosis do not require energy for things to pass through the cell membrane. That's why that's passive transport. However, in order for a cell to perform endo or exocytosis, it does require energy, which is why it is active transport. So just always think passive, I can pass through, no effort needed. So that's why there's no energy. Active transport, when you're active, you need energy, you're moving, so that will require ATP. I'm going to pause at this juncture. If you need to go ahead and rewatch the video at any time, please do so to help you prepare to understand this content.